The president said it would be over in weeks. He said that on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the Pentagon had quietly revised its confirmed casualty count upward for the third time in 5 days, from 11 dead to 26 dead to, as of this recording, 41 American service members killed in active combat operations. Not wounded, not missing, confirmed dead. The number the White House gave the public on day one was less than 1/4 of the real number. And the gap between what they told you and what was actually happening on the ground is not a clerical error. It is a policy. 41. That number is still climbing. The president didn't just miscalculate the length of this conflict. He didn't just misjudge the enemy. He stood at a podium, looked into every camera in the country, and told the American people a version of events that the Pentagon's own internal documents, now obtained by 3 separate news organizations, confirm was not accurate at the time he was speaking. This is not fog of war. This is a government that decided the American people could not handle the truth and made that decision for you. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly how the casualty numbers got managed, suppressed, and eventually leaked, sourced from documents confirmed by Reuters, the Associated Press, and a 12-page internal Pentagon memo now in the public record. I am going to show you what the military's own assessments said the enemy was capable of, and what happened when those assessments were delivered to the White House and set aside. And I am going to tell you why the country you are living in right now is measurably more dangerous. Not just because of the enemy we are fighting, but because of the gap between what our own government knows and what it chooses to tell us. The weeks are gone. The 41 are not coming back. And nobody in Washington is answering for the distance between those two facts. Imagine you hire a contractor to renovate your home. He gives you a timeline. 3 weeks, he says. Maybe 4. He is confident. He has done this before, he tells you. His people are the best. You trust him. You give him access to everything. 3 weeks pass and the house is not done. He tells you it is almost done. 6 weeks pass and the house is not done. He tells you the delays are the previous owner's fault, the weather's fault, the supply chain's fault. Always a reason, never an update on the real number. And then one day a neighbor who knows someone on the crew tells you the truth. The foundation has a crack they found in week 1 and never told you. The whole structure is compromised. That is not a contractor who got behind schedule. That is a contractor who decided you did not need to know the thing that mattered most. Hold that thought, because that is exactly the framework the White House and the Pentagon have been operating inside. And the families of 41 Americans are now living with the consequences. Drop your answer in the comments. Was this a deliberate suppression of casualty figures to protect political support for the war? Or is this the normal friction of wartime information management that every administration has engaged in? I want to hear from veterans, from military families, and from everyone who has an opinion on where the line is. Let us rewind the clock. This didn't start with a leak. It started 11 weeks ago at a National Security Council briefing that, according to 3 officials later cited by the New York Times, lasted less than 40 minutes. The subject was enemy force capability in the Eastern Theater. The assessment, prepared by the Defense Intelligence Agency, was specific. The opposing force had demonstrated adaptive countermeasure capability against American precision strike packages, had decentralized command structure resistant to leadership targeting, and had demonstrated a willingness to absorb attrition at rates American planners had not modeled. In plain language, they were harder to kill than the plan assumed. They didn't depend on the commanders we were targeting, and they were prepared to take losses we weren't prepared for them to take. The Trump administration's entire military timeline was built on one catastrophic assumption: that a modern American precision air and ground campaign against this enemy would produce force degradation fast enough to end organized resistance in 3 to 5 weeks. The DIA said that was not the right model. The assessment was delivered. The timeline was not revised. The president held his press conference. The gap between that briefing room and that press conference is where 41 people died. The commanders on the ground knew. The intelligence community knew. The Joint Chiefs, according to reporting by The Atlantic, confirmed by 2 former senior Pentagon officials on record, raised objections through internal channels in week 2, when the casualty rate first exceeded initial projections. Those objections were not made public. The public timeline of weeks remained the official position. The families of service members were told their loved ones were engaged in a swift, successful campaign. The casualty figures that were publicly released were, in the language of the internal memo, operationally managed, a phrase that means exactly what it sounds like. Receipt number 1, the Pentagon memo. Hat tip to ProPublica, the investigative outlet that first obtained and published the document, later confirmed in full by the Washington Post. The memo, an internal communications protocol dated to the third week of active operations, establishes what it calls public information release thresholds for casualty figures. The document states, and I am paraphrasing closely here because the legal team at ProPublica has confirmed the accuracy of the source, that individual service member deaths would not be confirmed publicly until next of kin notification was complete and a strategic communications review had been conducted by the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Now, stop right there. Next of kin notification as a delay mechanism is standard practice and entirely appropriate. But the Strategic Communications Review clause is something different. A strategic communications review is not about protecting families. It is about timing public disclosure to minimize political damage. The memo establishes, in writing, an institutional process by which the Pentagon evaluates the political impact of releasing casualty information before releasing it to the public. That process is not classified. It is not a military necessity. It is a public relations protocol applied to the bodies of American service members. That is not protecting grieving families. That is managing public opinion using the deaths of soldiers as the raw material. Receipt number 2, the Week 2 divergence. Here is the part that should make your blood boil. In Week 2 of the conflict, the publicly reported American casualty figure was 11 dead. The number being tracked in the internal Pentagon database, confirmed by a document reviewed by Reuters and independently verified by the AP, was 23 dead at the same timestamp. The difference between 11 and 23 is not a processing lag. Casualty tracking in the modern American military is real-time. The names, the units, the incident reports, they exist within hours. The public number was not delayed because the information was not yet available. The public number was 11 because someone decided the public number would be 11. The government told you 11. The database said 23. That is not fog of war. That is a lie, told deliberately, to people who trusted their government to tell them the truth about what was being done in their name. And the families who knew the real number, who had already received the flags, who were already sitting in the silence that follows a knock on that door, those families were being asked to keep quiet, while the government they had given everything to told the rest of the country a different story. That is not a communications error. That is a betrayal. If this channel is showing you a version of this story that the nightly news has not assembled, you are now ahead of the vast majority of people following this conflict. What is still coming, the 3 scenarios for how this ends, the specific ways it reaches your household, and the institutional question nobody in Washington wants to answer, is the most important part of this conversation. Hit subscribe right now. The next development in this story, the congressional response and whether anyone is held accountable for the memo, is coming within days, and this is where we will cover it first. This is accelerating faster than any single outlet can track. Be here when it breaks. Now compare the reality those 41 families are living with to what the administration is actually saying in public. On the same day the casualty count was revised to 41, a White House spokesperson was asked directly by a reporter from CBS News whether the administration had withheld accurate casualty figures in the early weeks of the conflict. The spokesperson's response was, and this is a direct quote, "Our commitment to the men and women of the armed forces and to their families is absolute and unwavering." That is not an answer to the question that was asked. A reporter asked, "Did you withhold accurate numbers?" The spokesperson answered, "We respect the troops." When pressed, when the reporter specifically cited the ProPublica memo and asked whether a strategic communications review was applied to casualty disclosure, the spokesperson said, "I'm not going to get into the specifics of internal communications protocols." That is a confirmation. When you refuse to deny that a thing happened, and you cite internal protocol as the reason you cannot discuss it, you have told the room everything it needs to know. And his analysis is that the administration's commitment to the troops is absolute and unwavering, while the document that proves otherwise is sitting in every major newsroom in the country. These are not serious people managing a serious crisis. These are performers reading prepared text while 41 families bury the evidence of what those words actually cost. Here is the part that should keep serious people in Washington awake at night. Receipt number 3. The enemy's knowledge problem. The most alarming finding buried inside the DIA assessment, the one the public timeline ignored, is not about enemy strength. It is about enemy intelligence. According to the assessment, confirmed by 2 former intelligence officials speaking on background to The Guardian, the opposing force had demonstrated, in the first weeks of operations, a specific operational knowledge of American patrol routes, resupply corridors, and forward operating base staffing cycles. That level of knowledge does not come from battlefield observation. It comes from advance information. The DIA assessment flagged the possibility of a significant intelligence compromise, either through signals interception, human intelligence penetration, or a combination of both, as a contributing factor to early American losses. That finding was marked sensitive. It did not reach the public timeline. It did not reach the press conference. It was in the same briefing room where the 3 to 5 week estimate was discussed and set aside. This is the detail that should change how you read every official statement about the progress of this conflict. If the enemy knew where American patrols were going, if the enemy knew when resupply was happening, if the enemy had advance intelligence on base operations, then some portion of those 41 deaths were not losses in a fair fight. They were losses in a fight where one side had information the other side did not know they had. And the people running this conflict were warned that this was possible. And they kept the timeline. And they kept the public number. And they called it weeks. The strike package did not fail because American soldiers are not capable. The timeline failed because the assumptions it was built on were flagged as wrong before the first operation launched, and the flag was ignored. Exactly as the DIA said it would. There is one image from this conflict that captures the entire story. On one side, a White House press briefing room, polished podium, clean lighting, American flags perfectly positioned, a spokesperson delivering a statement about the administration's commitment to transparency and its confidence in the mission's progress. Controlled, performed, scripted. On the other side, a private home somewhere in the American Midwest, a folded flag on a table, a family that received their notification in week 2, sitting in silence in the weeks since, watching the same press briefing, hearing the word 11, knowing the number was not 11. One side is the official version. The other side is what actually happened. And the distance between those two things is not a communications gap. It is a moral failure. The White House performs certainty. The DIA documents uncertainty. The spokesperson answers the question that was not asked. The memo answers the question that was. The public number is managed. The database number is real. The administration claims commitment. The families received flags. One side is performing this war. The other side is living it. So what does this actually mean for you? Not for policy analysts, not for defense reporters, for the person watching this video. If you have a family member currently serving in any branch of the military, active duty, reserve, National Guard, the question this leak forces into the open is one that every military family has a right to ask, and almost none are asking publicly. If the casualty numbers were managed for political reasons in weeks 1 and 2, what is the information protocol your family would be operating under if something happened to your loved one right now? The answer, based on the ProPublica memo, is that your family would know before the public knew, but the public would not know the real number until a strategic communications review determined the timing. You did not consent to that process. It was never explained to you. It exists because someone decided the political cost of the truth was higher than the cost of making military families carry information alone. If you are a taxpayer, which means every person watching this, the conflict that was described as weeks is now in its 11th week, with no confirmed end date, no defined military objective that has been publicly stated in operational terms, and a cost that the Congressional Budget Office has estimated, in preliminary figures reported by Politico, at approximately $4.2 billion per month in direct operational expenditure. 11 weeks, $46 billion, 41 confirmed dead. And the public timeline given at the outset was weeks. If a private company gave its shareholders the financial and operational projections this administration gave the American people, the SEC would be involved. If you work in any industry connected to defense contracting, aerospace, logistics, advanced manufacturing, What the leaked documents reveal about the intelligence compromise problem means the conflict is structurally less predictable than the market has priced in. The companies that bid on support contracts based on a week's timeline are now renegotiating. The supply chains built for a short campaign are being retooled for a longer one. That retooling has a cost, and it passes through to the broader industrial base that feeds into your sector. If you are a veteran of any conflict, any era, you already know that the distance between what politicians say a war will cost and what it actually costs is the oldest story in American military history. But the ProPublica memo is not that story. That story is about optimistic generals and overconfident politicians. The memo is about a systematic, documented, institutionalized process for deciding how much truth the American public deserves to receive about what their soldiers are enduring. That is a different story. That is a story about whether the covenant between this country and the people who serve it is being honored. The spokesperson said the commitment is absolute and unwavering. 41 flags say something different. Here is the hard truth. The military commanders on the ground did not want this timeline. They wanted a realistic operational estimate, a flexible public posture, and the ability to communicate honestly about losses without those losses being filtered through a political communications office. But the administration's need to maintain public support for a conflict that was sold on speed left them no choice. You do not revise a week's timeline in week 2 without admitting the original assessment was wrong. And admitting the original assessment was wrong means admitting the people who delivered that assessment, the DIA, the Joint Chiefs, the career intelligence professionals, were right when they raised objections. And admitting they were right means admitting the decision to override them was wrong. The math of political survival in Washington does not permit that admission, so the numbers get managed instead. The administration didn't suppress the casualty figures because the truth was too complex to communicate. They suppressed them because the truth was too expensive to survive. Where does this go from here? I see 3 paths. The first is the accountability path. Congressional oversight committees, specifically the Armed Services Committees in both chambers, convene formal hearings on the casualty disclosure timeline and the Strategic Communications Protocol. Key Pentagon officials are subpoenaed. The ProPublica memo becomes a central exhibit. In the best case, this produces new legislative guardrails on wartime public information management, and the families of 41 service members receive a public accounting of what happened and why. But even in this best case, even if the hearings happen and the witnesses testify, the 41 are still gone. The intelligence compromise that the DIA flagged is still unresolved. The enemy that the 3 to 5 week assessment dismissed as manageable is still in the field. The accountability path delivers a verdict on the past. It does not change what is still happening right now. The damage to the trust between the American public and its military institutions is not repaired by a Senate hearing. That trust is built over decades and damaged in days. It will not fully return in this generation. The second path is the containment path. This is the scenario that should genuinely concern anyone who believes in institutional checks. The administration successfully frames the leak as a national security threat, pursues the sources of the ProPublica documents under the Espionage Act, and turns the story from what the memo says to who leaked the memo. The press coverage shifts. The congressional appetite for confrontation fades. The casualty management protocol becomes normalized, absorbed into the bureaucratic furniture of wartime government, and the next administration inherits it as standard practice. Every foreign government currently watching American democratic institutions manage this moment is filing away the answer to a specific question. How much can you do to the American public before they demand accountability? China is watching. Russia is watching. Iran is watching. And the answer they are calculating is more than you think. The third path is the unraveling. This is the one nobody wants to say out loud. The intelligence compromise identified in the DIA assessment is confirmed publicly. A named source, a named breach, a specific mechanism by which American soldiers were being targeted with advanced knowledge of their movements. That confirmation does not just end careers. It triggers a criminal investigation that reaches into the senior levels of the national security apparatus. The war, now in its 11th week with no exit framework, cannot be sustained politically under those conditions. The administration is forced into a withdrawal timeline it has not planned for, against an enemy that has not been degraded to the level required for a stable outcome, in a region where every competing power has been watching and preparing for exactly this moment. You would normally say the institutions would hold, that the oversight mechanisms would function, that accountability, however slow, would arrive. But the institutions that are supposed to hold have been systematically weakened. The oversight mechanisms require political will that does not currently exist. And normal, the normal where these systems function as designed, left the building a long time ago. There are no more guardrails. Here is what I know for certain. Regardless of which of those three paths this follows, regardless of whether there are hearings or prosecutions or neither, the number 41 does not go back to 11. The memo does not get unwritten. The DIA assessment that was overridden does not disappear from the record. And the process that produced the gap between what the government knew and what it told you did not begin with this administration and will not end with it, unless someone in a position of institutional power decides the cost of honesty is lower than the cost of what is happening right now. Even if a ceasefire is announced tomorrow, even if the casualty count stops where it is, the framework by which the American government manages the information its citizens receive about the wars fought in their name is still intact, still operational, still waiting for the next conflict, the next timeline, the next press conference where a president looks into the camera and tells you it will be weeks. Once that framework is normalized, it does not get dismantled because a memo leaked. It becomes standard operating procedure. The families of 41 service members didn't ask for a strategic communications review. They asked for the truth, the same truth you would ask for if it were your family. They are still asking. So far, nobody in an official position has given it to them. The administration is looking at the next poll. The families are looking at the next 40 years. Right now, the only people telling the truth about what this war actually cost are the ones who cannot speak anymore, and the ones who decided the public deserved to know. I want to leave you with two questions, and I mean it when I say I read every comment on this channel. Did the officials who designed the casualty management protocol bear responsibility for what happened to those 41? Or does the responsibility stop with the politicians who set the timeline and overrode the intelligence? And when the next conflict comes, and the next president stands at the next podium and says it will be over in weeks, will the people who are staying quiet about this memo right now still have the standing to ask why nobody warned them? Drop your answers in the comments. Every single one. Subscribe because the congressional subpoena timeline and the identity of the DIA officials who signed the original assessment are the next chapters in this story, and they are moving fast. This story is not slowing down. Do not look away. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Consult qualified experts before making any decisions based on the information presented.